Welcome, I'm Butch Delaney, and this is Lesson 7 of the series I'll Bet You Didn't Know. In these lessons, we're looking for the obscure, the amazing, and the downright strange Bible facts you may have never heard. Today's lesson concerns the menorah and the Jewish celebration known as Hanukkah. The Jews' celebration of Hanukkah occurs each winter close to Christmastime, and it began about 150 years before Christ was born. It made me wonder, do you think Jesus ever celebrated Hanukkah? Given that most Christians do not come from a Jewish background, I would guess, and not everyone has a Jewish friend, as I did growing up, we may not know much about Jewish festivals. There are, after all, only about 7.5 million Jews in America out of a population of about 335 million. Roughly 2% of the nation are Jewish. You may not know all about the Jewish holidays. In 2020, the holidays are Purim in March 10th, Pesach, April the 9th through the 16th, Shavuot happens in May, 50 days after the Passover. Rosh Hashanah happens in September. That's the Jewish New Year. And of all of the holidays, that's the one that you probably have heard more about than any. Yom Kippur, which happens on September 28th at the end of the week of Rosh Hashanah. And then Sukkot happens in October this year, the Feast of Booths. But of course, there's always Hanukkah, and that happens this year in December the 11th through the 18th. Sometimes you see Hanukkah spelled with a C before it, and you might want to pronounce it Chanukah, but that would be wrong. It is still pronounced Hanukkah, even with the C in front of it. The C is just silent. It's known by these other names: the Feast of Dedication, the Festival of Lights, and the Feast of the Maccabees. I have a few questions for you before we get started. And the first question is this. Here are two Jewish menorah. There are a few differences, though, between these two. Can you spot the differences? There are a couple of differences. The candelabra on the left is a menorah, and it is using oil and a wick for light, and there are 7 branches. The candelabra on the right is using candles, and there are 9 branches. So which of these is lit during Hanukkah? And the answer is the 9-branched version. The 7-branched menorah is called a Hanukkah. The 9-branched menorah is called a Hanukkah. Hanukkah is lit during Hanukkah. A question. Both of these are a menorah, or which would be a menorah? Well, the answer is both of these are menorah. Not only these two, but also the little lamps that were used at the time of Jesus for light in a general home. The word menorah simply means lamp. Now, all this time, up until a few years ago, I had always thought there was really only one menorah, and that was the one that was in the Jewish tabernacle and the temple, maybe in Jewish synagogues today, but that is not the case. Now, the one in the temple and the tabernacle was huge. It weighed 75 pounds and was made of pure gold. But all of these are menorah. Menorah simply means lamp in the Jewish language. Which form of these was the menorah in Moses' temple, the 7-branched version or the 9-branched version? And the answer is the 7-branched version. Another question, which of these is older? Did Hanukkah precede the coming and the giving of the actual menorah that was in the temple? Well, the menorah that's in the temple was actually older than the Hanukkah that's used in Jewish homes. The 7-branched menorah had its beginnings with Moses in the wilderness sometime almost 3,000 years ago. The Hanukkah had its beginning just about 175 years before Christ's birth. So the practice of Hanukkah was certainly something Jesus could have known. He would have known about it as a youngster, and he probably looked forward to it just as much as any other Jewish children do today. So the question, did Jesus celebrate Hanukkah? Now, we don't have any record of him and his family lighting a menorah during Hanukkah. But I do know that he would have been aware of the festival and its significance, and he would have known of the details regarding why all the Jews were celebrating this time of year. So, John tells us that it was winter in Jerusalem, and the Jews were celebrating the festival of dedication, better described as the festival of rededication of the temple. Jesus had come to the city, and he was walking in the temple courts in Solomon's colonnade. He knew what day it was. He knew what was happening this week in all of the Jewish homes. We don't know if he and his mother Mary and his brothers and sisters were lighting candles every day, but being from a Jewish background, we can probably infer that they were. Why would they have been any different from all of the others? The Bible's only mention of the festival was in John 10, where Jesus was in the temple at the time of the festival of rededication. Other Jewish writings mention the holiday, though. The books of the Maccabees, which is not anything in our canon necessarily, it's mentioned there. It's mentioned in the Gemara, or the Jewish Talmud. It's mentioned certainly in the Mishnah, in the Megillah, or Scroll of Antiochus, and the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus all mention the holiday. But you will not find it in the Old Testament because it was a holiday that was created during the intertestamental period, after the close of the Old Testament and before the coming of Jesus. It's only presented in the other writings of the Jews mentioned there. So you won't find Hanukkah anywhere in the Bible. So to understand the holiday of Hanukkah, you have to go back to the time period about 175 years before Jesus was born. Let's take a brief look at that history. The Greeks were in charge, and it was just prior to the time that the Romans took over. Antiochus, or Epiphanes, as he preferred to call himself, was the Greek ruler at the time. Now, this man was very bad. We've probably never seen any ruler over the Jews as bad as him. He called himself Epiphany because he felt that he was the actual image of God. God manifest is what Epiphany means. The Jews referred to him as Epimony, which is a kind of play on words, but it's a way of saying madman instead of Epiphany. He persecuted the Jews mercilessly, as we will see. The Seleucids had no respect for the Jewish religion, and Antiochus's desire was for all of his subjects to become very Greek in their being, in their thinking, in their customs, their practices, and even in their language. The Jews of the day would not bow to this pressure. They refused to speak Greek because they had their own language. They did not bow to the Greek gods and held fast to their one God, so they were severely punished. And to make matters worse, Epiphanes inserted himself into their religion, and he got to choose for them the man who would be their high priest. And he would bid this out to anyone who is willing to pay the coin. The high priest Menelaus was not of the priestly tribe, yet he proclaimed himself the Jewish high priest. He took down much of the gold in the temple, and he sold it to fund Antiochus's government. He did not allow Sabbath worship. He did not allow the worship of the holy days, and worst of all, he forbade the practice of circumcision. To show his hatred for the Jews, he even offered a sacrifice of a pig on their altar. And supposedly, he committed the ultimate sacrilege upon the altar of burnt offerings. What could be worse than offering a pig, you might wonder? Well, it is thought that he probably erected a statue of the Greek god Zeus upon the altar, or just somewhere in the temple. Well, it was during this time that Antiochus fell out of favor with the Parthians, and a war ensued. They fought him mercilessly and ran him completely out of the country. The second book of Maccabees tells of his fate. God struck him an incurable blow. Riding back to the city of Jerusalem to quell a riot, his intestines began to hurt so bad that he fell out of a speeding chariot, and it's recorded that he broke every limb in his body. Even his intestines were spilled during the fall, and he obviously died from his internal injuries, much to the joy of the Jews in Jerusalem. In his discourse on the Mount of Olives, as recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the abomination of desolation was not the fall of Antiochus. Rather, it's something that will happen in the future. And it's hard to imagine something that will be more terrible than the reign of the madman Antiochus. So that brings us up in time. Here we are now at the celebration of the festival of the rededication, and Jesus is in the temple courts talking to those who were there. It was a joyous time of celebration for the Jews. The madman was dead. They rid themselves of anything Hellenistic that had been forced upon them by the madman Antiochus. They tore down his altars. They destroyed his high places of detestable worship that included prostitution and idolatry, even in the temple. And they restored the office of the Jewish high priest and began to offer proper worship, including burnt offerings. Things began to look normal for them for a change. In 200 BC, they had a rededication of the temple. And that was the genesis of the Hanukkah celebration that happens even today. The first celebration was named Hanukkah, and they were so happy to be able to worship again. Notice the year that's spoken of by John. That year, Hanukkah happened to fall on the 25th day of their 9th month, Kislev, which would have corresponded to our December. The first Hanukkah would have happened on the day of Christmas in our 12-month period. That really doesn't happen that much, that often. Now, no discussion of Hanukkah would be complete without mentioning a story that is told each Hanukkah by families all over the globe. This story was added later than the day that Jesus was at the temple of the Feast of Dedication. It is the story of Judith, or Yehudit. She lived in a town, probably Jerusalem, that had been overtaken by a Syrian general named Holofernes. Judith, a widow in town, enticed the general of the troops to stay in her home. She gave him salty goat cheese to make him thirsty, and then gave him some very strong wine and got him to fall asleep in a stupor. And when he dazed off, she removed him of his head with his own sword. Then she took the head back in town, and she used it to encourage the men to challenge the bad king Antiochus. And the city was victorious in running the army out of town. This story is told each Hanukkah to show how effective even the work of an everyday person could be. Also, since we're talking about Hanukkah, we need to talk about the Ner Tamid. The relighting of the temple happened on that day 15 years before the day that Jesus was walking in Solomon's colonnade. Now, each Saturday in their synagogues, Jews everywhere today will see a lit lamp that is never turned off. Most of them are electrical, but they're never turned off. It is near their synagogue's ark where the scrolls of the Torah are kept. Now, this lamp that's always on reminds them today of how the lamp in the temple was never without oil and it burned continually. Now, here's a little bit more interesting history about that as relates to this holiday. As soon as the temple was restored to the Jews after the Syrian invasion and what today is known as the Maccabean revolt, the Ner Tamid in the western section of the temple in Jerusalem was relit. The problem was they searched everywhere, searched diligently, but they could find only one jar of oil, and that was enough only for one day. So they dispatched a man to go to the olive presser and get enough of the holy oil to last a while, but they knew that it would take 8 days to get the oil that was purified and sanctified to be used for the Ner Tamid. Their precious light would soon be out again before it could be replenished. But miraculously, that one jar of oil lasted for 8 days. And that is sometimes why Hanukkah is called the Festival of Lights or the Miracle of Lights. Hanukkah is a week-long celebration, but the first night is very special. And this is the night the menorah will be lit. The dinner is especially delightful that night. It will be made, include something that has been deep fried in oil to remember the miracle of the Ner Tamid. Cheese will be eaten to remember the gruesome work of Judith. And then the menorah will be lit by the entire family to remind them of the miracle of the Ner Tamid. Not to mention that the kids will get to play games that involve a dreidel and eat chocolate coins called gelt and get money. Back to the menorah. There are actually 3 lamps or menorah that are used in Jewish worship routinely today. First, there is a 7-branched one that uses olive oil and a wick. The 6 outer branches represent man's work. The 7th in the middle represent God's work. Second, there is the Hanukkah, which has 9 branches. We've already talked about that one. 8 of these are for the 8 days of the festival. The middle one, which usually is either higher or lower, has no significance. Not that it has less or more significance than the others. It actually has no significance. It is simply a candle that's there, and it's used, you light it first, and then it's used to light all of the other candles. Shamash means attendant or helper. And finally, at Jewish funerals, a cantor will often light a 5-branched menorah. This represents the 5 parts of the human being, according to the Jews. Humans have a biological soul, an emotional soul, a rational soul, they have intuition, and they have will. When a person dies then at a funeral, these lamps are lit to remember the life that once was. Shamash means attendant, as I've said, and this candle is lit first and it's used to light the rest. But the placement of the candles and the lighting order of the candles is very important. Place the candles, and if you follow the white numbers, you'll see what I mean, from right to left, and then one day at a time, a candle is lit for the next 8 days, starting from the left and going back to the right. The prayer that is said each night reminds them of the miracle of the lights and thanks God for the blessings that He bestows. So follow the yellow numbers for the lighting of the candles, one each day. The first candle on day 1 after sunset on Friday. Now, why would they start a holiday that would be a week-long, 8-week day holiday? Why would they start it on Friday? Well, actually, after sunset on Friday means that you're actually in the next week, and so it is lit on the actually on the day of Saturday instead of Friday. The last candle will be extinguished on day 8, but it has to be extinguished before sunset the following Saturday before it becomes a Sunday at sunset. So you have 8 days of candles then that are lit. Well, who gets to light the candles? It varies from home to home. In some families, it's the dad. In some families, the mom. Or in some families, even the children get to participate. And in some families, there are as many Hanukkah as there are people in the family, and each person gets their own. That would surely have been a festival of lights in my family, where I had 4 sisters and a mom and a dad. So, are there any special requirements for where the menorah is to be placed? It should be placed in a public place like a window or a front porch so that anyone passing by might see it. And during the first night, the children play a game called using the dreidel. The top that is spun has 4 sides, so the question will be, which of the sides will fall face up? All participants have a stash of candies in front of them. Players take turns spinning the dreidel. If it falls on none, N-U-N, no action is taken. Players take turns spinning. If it falls on none, no action taken. If it lands on gimel, you get the whole pot. If it lands on hay, you take half of the pot. But if it lands on shin, you must give back a predetermined amount back and put it back into the kitty. The game continues until someone spins the top. It lands on gimel. And gifts are exchanged. The children may receive actual coins, money, and they may receive chocolates shaped as coins, covered in gold foil. These candies are known as gelt. So in summary, what is Hanukkah all about? It reminds the Jews of the rededication of the temple following the Greek period of the rule of the Hasmoneans. It reminds the Jews that God provides for us as he did with the miracles of the oil. It reminds the Jews that those of us who are steadfast, even in times of persecution, will overcome, just as Judith did. Now that you know a little bit more about Hanukkah, you can be more comfortable about that Jewish holiday if any of your Jewish friends ever invite you to their home for the celebration. You also can know that God gives us remembrances, just like the Lord's Supper, to keep his word always in front of us. In a sense, we celebrate the Lord's death each week as we are commanded to rededicate ourselves to God's word. Thank you very much for watching this lesson. May God keep us always in a state of remembrance of what he has done for us and continually rededicating ourselves to his will.